Our next speaker is an iOS developer, and she claims to be addicted to coding from the early childhood, as I understand. Um, uh, Her surname is unpronounceable for me, so I give up after several tries, but I try really to do it the best. But let's give a nice welcome to Ágnes, and let's listen about the ReactiveCocoa.
Hi. It's actually Ágnes Vásárhelyi Nagy in Hungarian. I know it sounds weird, but I usually let everyone call me Ágnes because it's simple. So, today I'm here to talk about ReactiveCocoa and what to do with ReactiveCocoa, for example, today. So for this occasion, I was really looking for the best definition about what ReactiveCocoa is, and besides, it's a framework for Cocoa. And I ran into this NS Hipster blog post by Matt, where he defined ReactiveCocoa as the the tool for responding to changes in Cocoa. And actually, I think that's by far the most perfect definition of what it does. And we will see the technical details later. But let's start with what is reactive. So reactive is reactive is when you build up your application by the composition of your async data streams. And what a data stream is, it actually can be anything that changes over time. So, for example, data on this stream can be like button clicks or strings or anything. And since you have more data streams in your application because you are building an actual application, not just one information, you will have more data streams. And the best thing about making it reactive is that you can combine them with operators. And there are a lot of operators. So since a stream can be an input to another stream, actually, one of the points here, data can be another stream. So it's basically, the possibilities are endless, how to compose flows from these. For example, this is a merge operator. So let's imagine that the first stream is the occurrences of the invocation of view did appear, for example. And you have a list and you have a refresh button. And let's imagine that the second stream is the actual event of pressing the refresh button. So if you'd like to set, for example, value, or you would like to combine this information that you have to refresh your list to another stream, then you can just merge these two and be updated by both of the stream's values. So that was about reactive. And about ReactiveCocoa, it's a 4-year-old framework. It started with Objective-C, and actually it's pretty big. So it does a lot of things, and it's really complex. So it's a huge dependency. But where I worked until last year at Prezi, we built up the whole desktop application for Mac with ReactiveCocoa, and it was a huge code base compared to my previous experiences. But yeah, it was a nice experiment to see what you can do with such a big third-party dependency, diving so deep in your code. But now it's in production, and I guess users are happy with it. So about the Objective-C API itself, the most important unit of the Objective-C version of ReactiveCocoa is rec signal. So we have seen these, my beautiful drawings of data streams, and that is a signal. So signal is the kind of data values over time. And it's the button click, the change of model, view did appear, or anything you can imagine. And the emojis are there because it can be either hot or cold. And in the Objective-C version of ReactiveCocoa, it depends on how you use it or how you define it, but there is no separate class or type for that. So hot signal is that when you have a signal that until it's created, it will emit values no matter who's subscribed to the updates. So usually in this pattern, we have the signal itself and the observers who's listening to the changes of the values of the signals or events. And if it's a hot signal and an observer joins, so they are interested in the new values, then it will receive the new values after the point it joined. And cold signal compared to that is when there's a signal that doesn't send any value until someone's subscribed. But when it's subscribed, it will receive all the values the signal has. So they will receive the same values, both the observers. And yeah, there are 3 types of events that can happen on a rec signal. It's next, error, or completed. Next means there's a new value on the signal, and you can get that value. So you can, for example, inject side effects. Completed means there are no more values on the signal, and error means that the signal couldn't finish and you will get an error. So I mentioned subscription. It's really about listening to the changes on the signal and any kind of event that can occur on the actual signal. And this is the most important thing, I think, in this whole ReactiveCocoa. So it will really, if you subscribe to a cold signal, it will trigger all the side effects. And if you subscribe to it again from another part, then it will trigger all the side effects again. So it's really the base of all of it. Yeah, and you can inject side effects without subscribing to the actual signal with this do next or do completed or something. So you can chain it, for example, into the middle of a signal chain. There was RecObserve. It's a macro, and it was really, really useful to turn properties into signals the way it there's a property and you want to be updated about its values. And if you, for example, if you want to combine it to another stream, it's really handy to have these macros. For example, it's the other way around is rec, because we can actually update properties value with this macro based on signals values. So you can just combine it all together. There is rec sequence, which was really handy at the time because before Swift, people didn't do transforming of collections in a declarative way. I guess it came with ReactiveCocoa, or at least I've seen it first there. So React sequence is a lazy collection where you could, for example, do, I don't know, filter and a lot of transformation without it evaluating all of the values. So, sorry. So it was really about doing some functional magic in Objective-C, and now it doesn't sound magic because we have Swift. So one of the most important parts of all of it that you can use ReactiveCocoa on the UI effectively, because there are bindings and there is React command, which is an action. So it's basically the reactive version of UI action. And of course, you are able to subscribe to, I don't know, to any kind of NS control actions. So it's really handful. And bindings, for example, if you had a text field, you can update the text field value based on a signal, or you can update a property based on the text field's values. So it's really two-way around. And then Swift came along, and the guys at GitHub, because this whole framework were developed at GitHub, and the guys decided to support Swift. And actually, they created an API really fast, which was just a port to be able to use the existing Objective-C code from Swift. But then they decided to do some more modifications, concept-wise even. So they created a new separation of the signal itself. So now it looks like event is the type of anything you can send on a signal. And there is signal, which is a hot signal, and signal producer is the cold signal. So event means something has happened. I drew another beautiful drawing just for you. So this is where you can see that events are traveling through the signal itself, and all of it is the signal. It can have 4 kind of event. So it was 3 previously, but now there is interrupted, which means the signal has been cancelled. Yeah, we already knew about next, completed, failed. And there is something special here. It has an error type now, so you can be aware of the errors type in compile time. And there is no error, so you can set that. You can say that there is no way that this signal will fail. Yeah, interrupted is when you or something else cancels your signal. So you can be prepared for all of these kind of events. So as I mentioned, signals are the hot signals in the ReactiveCocoa API 4. And yeah, this is about, these contain asynchronous events, and once you start to observe it, you can access all the events. Signal producer is produces signals. Yeah, surprise. And you have to start it manually. So it was a bit weird when I started to use it that I had to start it manually, but I understand there are limitations, but it felt a bit imperative. Once you start signal producer, it will create a signal, but it will return a disposable for you, which means you can cancel the signal later. through that disposable object. And there is start with signal, which is really useful when you would like to have multiple subscribers on the same signal, but you don't want to subscribe more times, so this way it won't trigger the side effects all over again. So the fact is that every time you start a signal producer, it will create a new signal. And it was really hard to get used to it for the first time, but it makes sense. And now there is this observer type, which might be familiar from Rx. And that's the point, that the guys wanted to get ReactiveCocoa a bit closer to Rx. So it's not just inspired by FRP, but it's inspired by Rx now. And the pattern is really easy. So you can observe a signal, and then you can switch through the events, or you can even, there are some dedicated functions to just observe next or something else. And you can inject side effect without subscribing, so it's almost the same, just Swift syntax. There is a property value, which is for observing a value. So it's kind of like a connection from the imperative word to the reactive word. So you can create reactive value manually, and then it's turned to a signal. So you can actually observe it and combine its values to other signals. So it's really nice to have. And about the UI, there are some differences here, because now instead of instead of rec command, there is action, and there is Cocoa action, which is basically the same, but for kind of closer to NS or UI controls. And yeah, binding is, I think binding is not really ready, so it's not the same as in the Objective-C version, where you could just type rec something and something, a function showed up which you could use. So right now, I think the best way is to create UI extensions for UI stuff yourself. But I just saw an issue a few days ago, I think, where some other extension it might gonna be merged into ReactiveCocoa itself to get more use of these third-party extensions. So my intentions were to show you what is ReactiveCocoa, but when you are thinking of starting out with it and do it everywhere, because it's really awesome, I suggest to think about it first, where to use it, because as we worked with ReactiveCocoa for a year, we have all these experiences in, it was really, really good for async operations, for chaining async operations, like a future promise, or for network requests, for example. It was really nice to bind the view and the view model to each other through reactive stuff. And yeah, because we worked with MVVM, which is really handy, it's a good fit with ReactiveCocoa. And we built up all the bindings between the view and the view model with it. And the last thing I wanted to share is that we introduced ReactiveCocoa to the business logic too, and it was a failure. So a lot of things got async. We didn't want to be async, and it got really messy when we started to fix it and synchronize everything by hand. So there are some solutions, like ReactiveCocoa has a scheduler, so you can dispatch stuff around with between different schedulers, but it was really messy. So you maybe came all the way along to hear about RxSwift, and you were going to be disappointed because I actually wanted to tell some, I don't know, some differences between RxSwift and ReactiveCocoa, but actually I think the most important difference is that RxSwift is the official Swift port of the Reactive extensions. So if you are like me, who started working in iOS and not with C or C++ or Java or JavaScript or anything else, you will be so close to Cocoa and iOS and or Mac frameworks that ReactiveCocoa will feel a bit more familiar than Rx. So Rx is a really professional and clean way to do reactive programming in any of the supported languages, which is awesome. And if you learn it in one language, you can easily adopt it into another. It has a lot of documentation, a huge community. Everyone is talking about it, so it's really nice. And it's Swift. So I don't want to say one is better than the other. It's just, for me, who worked with iOS since I started, it was really close to me because in Objective-C I didn't have the chance to learn Rx. So I think both are impressive projects, and for the technical part, the biggest difference is that in Rx there is an observable type, and you can basically do most of the stuff with this observable without any of this signal magic. So yes, and there are a lot of other solutions. So if you would like to go for the future promising, or you would like to go for just the observation, it's really easy to start with another framework which is specified in that. So you don't have to pull in all both of or one of the motherships. You can just use any kind of these smaller frameworks. But if you are really would like to do the mothership thing, I can tell you that there are companies who works with either ReactiveCocoa or RxSwift in production. So as I told you, I worked at Prezi, so we have the iOS and the Mac app written in ReactiveCocoa and Objective-C. I know the same about SoundCloud iOS, and Fabric just came out with their iOS app, and it's written with Swift and ReactiveCocoa 4. So it would be really interesting to talk with them about how that felt. And Artsy has one of their apps in production written with RxSwift, and it's also open source. So if you are interested in that, you can just check it out or ask Ash Farrow, who's here. And yeah, my best suggestion would be to discuss it with people, because there are so many implementations, there are so many theories flying around the internet. So how I learned this whole thing is that I worked with or talked to a lot of guys about it, and everybody is just really helpful. And yeah, I'm trying to be helpful. So thank you very much. And it was me. This is my blog if you're interested in my reactive journey. And if you have any questions, just go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ágnes. Usually I go with the first question, but here we go.
Hey, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Marin.
Can you explain one more time about the interrupted state that was introduced? Like, what was the reason to introduce it, like add it, and maybe where could it be used?
Because I think that if you cancel your signal producer, so you cancel your signal through your signal producer, you will create an interrupted event on the signal. And if you like to know about that and prepare it for like a different way than an error, you can subscribe to that change.
But the error can also have an error type. Like, isn't that the type of, isn't interrupted a type of error, or is it just, I don't know, just,
Maybe
picking the details here?
I'm not sure about why it's designed this way. Maybe it's just philosophical. I don't know.
Fair enough. Okay.
Before you start any kind of project, there's always a lot of questions which technology we should go for, etc. And could you give us some hints for what kind of applications and stuff we should consider using ReactiveCocoa, and for what kind of other apps we definitely shouldn't go for it? You give some hints regarding the layers in the app, that simply business logic is not the place for ReactiveCocoa. But are there any hints for apps in general?
Apps in general, I think from the function aspect, I wouldn't say anything. But for example, if you are a startup and you are building an MVP and you are in a rush and you have a deadline for yesterday, I wouldn't suggest to start learning Reactive on this application for the first time, because I wouldn't do that, because I did Reactive with Objective-C the last time, I mean, in a company. So if I would start at a company tomorrow and with Swift, I'm not sure if I would start with RxSwift, because I would have to learn the language itself, like, more deeply. So I think it's, if you are building for scale and if you want to make sure that your code can go really large without being really messy, I would definitely suggest to use Reactive.
That's a very general answer, but very good, yeah.
Sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
So you told that you built a few apps, production apps using Reactive frameworks. And I have a question. Do you experience any performance problems with that? And if yes, then maybe some tips to how to avoid that.
Yeah, sure. Very good question. So when we introduced ReactiveCocoa, for example, the Prezi iOS app, we had some performance issues with scrolling, because all the bindings to the table view cells were written with ReactiveCocoa, and it introduced such, I don't know, overhead that it was, lagging when you scrolled. So we decided to not figure out how to do that more optimized way with ReactiveCocoa, but we just eliminated that stuff. It was like 3 lines of code, so it wasn't that bad. And then just go with the imperative way, and it worked perfect again. So I think that if you're doing something really sensitive to performance and you can do it the other way, I mean, that this really tiny detail that the cells, images, and something like that, then you should just go the other way. For the Mac app, we didn't have any issues because it's a Mac, but for mobile, it does matter. I don't know about RxSwift. I think if there is a difference in performance, we should definitely ask Ash about that.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Ágnes.
Thank you.